We now turn to the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to go back in time only a week ago when we were last talking and summarize what has taken place since then. So, number one, a bounty offered for killing U.S. Armed Services members in Afghanistan, the Trump administration knew about and did not take action on. Number two, maybe this is the one that was to be anticipated, but a new major second wave of COVID has struck the South and the West, and probably as a direct result of the premature opening of several states without any federal guidance. Third, a circuit court ruled that the Justice Department, with the Attorney General's personal involvement, can drop the Michael Flynn case the same week that Mr. Barr fires Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. attorney in Manhattan, whose office was investigating the Trump family and their associates. And finally, we see in major cities the movement to either defund or dramatically reduce the budgets for their law enforcement departments, including Baltimore, Portland, Philadelphia, and Hartford. I mean, the list goes on, but what an incredible time. And it all reminds me of that, the slang that came out of World War II called FUBAR, which I can't use the first name, but it means blank up beyond all recognition. Craig, where are we at this point? I mean, this is, you can't dream this up.
Well, you certainly cannot. Sticking with your military metaphors, maybe, you know, I don't know how many wars can be fought on how many fronts by this administration. It's exceeded anything that I've ever witnessed. I thought that the question first of the intelligence on Russians, you know, paying off people to attack U.S. and other soldiers, I thought that was, it's not only damaging in terms of what leaked, it's the fact that how much is leaking says that the intelligence community has kind of gone to war with this White House. They even leaked at some point that we had knowledge of the accounts from which money came and the accounts to which money went. This is a huge transgression in terms of intelligence to signal what information we have. But they did it, clearly, the people who leaked it, clearly, to refute the White House and the president's suggestions that there was uncertainty about this or that was not aware of it. You know, and the coronavirus situation is just tragic. I was thinking about it today that, you know, if you go to a doctor and you have an ailment that you're concerned about, you take the doctor's advice. Maybe you get a second opinion, maybe you get a third opinion. But if all the medical expertise tells you to do something, thoughtful people generally do it. And in this case, by refuting the scientists and the doctors, we've sent people out to gatherings, and increasingly they're becoming ill or infected with the coronavirus. Sad story out today about a socialite in Washington, D.C. who thought it'd be a clever idea to have a party at her home after an online chat and fundraising event. And now she's sick, and the people who attended, some of the people who attended are ill. So I think it's having an increasingly depressing effect on people. I think people are going to become increasingly discouraged. And I think we've said here before, just because Donald Trump says something doesn't make it so. He is going to have to confront the realities that he's actually played a part in developing over the course of the last several weeks. But it's not a good time, that's for sure.
Al, what are your thoughts?
Well, you could have added to that list the European travel ban on Americans, which is pretty humiliating to a lot of Americans. I guess we really needed a president who was going to make America great again. You know, in World War II, we had Franklin Roosevelt who gave us hope. Today we have a president who basically is ignorant and uninformed, I think, in decline mentally and physically, and does anything but give our country hope. Now, we have a lot of these serious problems, and, you know, in fairness, Donald Trump didn't create them. He didn't create the virus. But the way he's handled them, his just basically nonsensical leadership has made, in almost every case you mentioned, the problem much worse. That's the bad news. But Americans always have hope. And the good news is this is an election year. And in 4 months, we're going to have a presidential election. Until then, I don't think Trump's going to change. It's sort of on Trump. But if we don't do something on election day to change this, then it's on us.
You know, Al, sticking with you, it's hard to find good news about the Trump for president campaign these days. But when you look at this election and compare it to 2016, is there something we're missing here? Because Trump has had this remarkable ability to bounce back from Entertainment Tonight interviews to a sundry of things that normally would put anybody's candidacy in terminal condition.
Well, I don't think he's going to bounce back this time. 2020 is not 2016. First, this election is a referendum on Trump's presidency, and he's losing that. Voters basically see him as failing at the two biggest problems he's had, which are coronavirus and the social unrest. Now, you know, the economy's in free fall. Our reputation around the world is in free fall also. And the voters, in my view, have basically made the judgment they want him out. I saw a Pew poll that came out yesterday. It had 48% of the country strongly disapproving of him. That doesn't leave him much margin for error. And only 12% of all Americans, but only 19% of Republicans think that the country's going in the right direction. For Republicans, that's a 36-point drop in the last 2 months since their April poll. His base is shrinking, it's not growing, and I don't see that changing. The other thing I just want to say about the difference between 2016 and 2020 is in 2016, both candidates were disliked. They were about the two most unpopular nominees that major parties have put up. Well, Trump won those voters who disliked both of them by 17 points, and that was almost 1 in 5 voters. That's a big chunk. Now, this time, Biden, no matter what he tries to do to Biden, and no matter what his attacks, Biden just doesn't have that kind of the negatives that Hillary does. And the difference is, like in a normal election, when both candidates are disliked, the challenger is really in the advantage, and people vote for the challenger, and I think that's going to happen this time.
Greg, any possible way in which President Trump can get reelected?
I don't see it today for sure, but I think one of the reasons is that I agree with Al, 2020 is not 2016. 2016 was a time when people were really very discouraged about what they saw in Washington. They didn't like what was happening. They had many of them had not enjoyed the kind of economic recovery that other Americans had enjoyed, and those frustrations found really a place with the Trump campaign. And even if people didn't like what he said, they figured it was high time somebody else get a chance from outside of Washington to come in and fix things. Well, I don't think 4 years later, those people are going to consider too much being fixed. Coal miners didn't go back to work, like he said. Steel workers didn't go back to work. Imports, exports didn't turn out to be, what he said they'd be. And of course, you've got the virus. So he is not a candidate that can any longer say that he's running against Washington. He has been president for 4 years. and has to bear responsibility for some of the things that have happened and some of those things that have not happened. I agree with Al. I think Joe Biden is a very different kind of candidate than Hillary Clinton was, and does not bear some of the burdens that she had to bear. It's all about, you know, the campaigns that the two of them run and the way they present themselves over the next few months. But it's certainly very hard for me to see how Donald Trump digs himself out of the hole that he's dug himself into.
Do you see a significant Republicans for Biden movement?
Yeah, I've noticed it too, and I've noticed that my phone traffic or email traffic on that subject is rising. I think that the kinds of people that are getting behind this have made it somewhat safer and more comfortable for other Republicans to vote for a Democrat or vote for somebody other than the incumbent president. I suspect it will grow, and I think that there's a message being sent there that we've had quite enough of this, and you know, we're ready for a change.
Al?
I think there will be a significant Republican vote for Biden. I mean, some of the top Republican operatives have started the Lincoln Project. There's, I think, a Republicans for Biden group that have done, to me, the best ads, the best anti-Trump ads of anybody in the campaign. And those are people with reach because they've run campaigns for Republicans. They've beaten me plenty of times. And I think that as we get closer, and I just looking at the list of Republican senators, there are 23 of them up this time, and you know, probably 9 of them are in contested races, and that could even expand if Trump continues to fall. There are going to be a lot of Republicans who are going to try to find a way to run away from Trump and probably wind up in the Biden.
We're going to try something new this time around. We actually gotten a couple of letters asking you all some questions, and I wanted to use one of them tonight. This is in reference to a conversation we had last week about Senate Majority Leader McConnell. McConnell returns to the Senate. Why would he not continue being Majority Leader, as Craig Fuller said? And does Craig think that the Senate would go blue, or that McConnell is tired of the responsibility? Who would replace him? And would that be South Dakota's John Thune? Craig, to you.
Well, in the parlance of Washington, I think what I meant to say, if it wasn't clear, was that while I can't imagine a scenario in which Leader McConnell is reelected and then decides not to retain the leadership position, I think he would retain it if the Republicans were in the majority. What I was suggesting is that he's an odds-on favorite to win, but he might return to a Senate controlled by Democrats, in which case, of course, he would have to forfeit that role. But he's been there too long, and he's too wise to win re-election and then give up that position, in my view.
Al, what are your predictions on that?
Well, I'm not very good at inside Republican politics, but you know, you got to bake or eat the cake you bake. And he's been baking this Trump cake for a long time. And he's, as I said, there are 23 Republican senators up this time. I think he's going to lose the Senate. As Craig knows, internal caucus politics are very complicated, and sometimes things happen for reasons you cannot understand on the outside. I used to run the House Democratic Caucus, so I used to run these internal elections. And I think if the Republicans do not retain control of the Senate, and I think, to be honest with you, I think they're going to lose the Senate, then McConnell may have some trouble maintaining his majority leadership. Maybe they'll let him stay on for 2 more years. But the truth is, when you're a leader and you lose a congressional election, especially one that you should not lose, it's hard to keep your job.
I'm sure Democrats are feeling a sigh of relief that two moderate Senate candidates won over progressive candidates in both Kentucky and I guess it was Colorado. Is that the kind of victory that might put Mitch McConnell at risk, Craig?
A lot depends on what happens, obviously, at the top of the ticket. If it's a real rout for the incumbent president, that in all likelihood has an impact. I have to think that it goes back to where we started this conversation. There is so much turmoil in the country that all bets are really off in terms of Republicans being able to hold on to the leadership of anything they have right now. That's, by the way, at the state and levels as well, because voters are going to become increasingly frustrated by a party who's held the White House and the Senate not being able to grapple with some of the problems we have. I think it's a very long-term problem for my party, and it's going to take some time to build back credibility with the American voters.
Al, last thoughts?
You know, these things go in cycles, and as I think I said last week or the week before, I sat at home hosting a party on election eve 1980 to which nobody came because Fuller and Reagan and that crowd knocked out a dozen Democratic senators who we had no idea were going to be beaten. A tsunami election, you know, you just cannot control. If I were, you know, to be honest with you, I don't really think it matters a lot who won that Democratic primary in Kentucky. Hickenlooper probably is a stronger candidate in Colorado, and he's been a favorite, and he was a popular governor, probably to win the seat regardless. Kentucky, Democrats are only going to win that seat if it's a complete tsunami. So it probably doesn't matter.
Well, until next time, thank you all.